All right, Trey. Let's talk realignment, shall we? I mean, I feel like I need to keep refreshing Twitter like it's the start of NBA free agency, with just how much news keeps dropping in regards to realignment in college sports. I think we're in a spot right now to where things are starting to settle down a little bit, but obviously the last week has been crazy as hell. It started with the announcement that Colorado was moving to the Big 12 starting in 2024, and then just shit hit the fan from that moment on. The Big 10 adding both Oregon and Washington, and in the Big 12 in reaction to that, adding three more schools: Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. So Texas won't get to be a part of the new look Big 12, or at least the newest look Big 12. Obviously, there are four new schools in the Big 12 this year, and Texas will play a couple of them this season. But I don't even know where to begin. I guess just I'll give you the floor. Your biggest takeaways from this latest round. I don't think we can call it the last round because this thing never stops, but the latest round of realignment in college athletics.
Yeah, this officially, well, maybe not officially, unofficially puts an end to one of the worst leadership tenures in sports history with George Kliavkoff and his attempt to maneuver the Pac 12 through the craziness of NIL and realignment and really just overplaying his hand repeatedly. Going back more than a year now, that has left his conference in shambles. Literally, four members left in this conference: Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State. Those four schools are going to have to find a new home too, because the Pac 12 is done, BK. Even if officially they're not going to be done until the end of this athletics calendar year, the Pac 12 is no more. And on the one hand, it is sad because the Pac 12 does have a fairly storied history. On the other hand, times change. And if you don't evolve with the times, you get left behind. And that's exactly what is happening with the Pac 12 here. They overvalued themselves going back a year. This would even be prior to USC and UCLA bolting for the Big Ten. But after USC and UCLA bolted for the Big Ten, they were still overvaluing what their worth was with that next media rights deal. And ultimately, that led to this conference's demise. And kudos to Brett Yormark, a guy that I have spoken highly of for more than a year now, since the first time I spoke with him at Big 12 Media Days. Spoke with him this most recent round a month ago in Arlington. And I continue to be impressed not only with what he has to say, but how he operates, how he is an outside the box thinker. He's somebody who's willing to take risks, and he is someone who is always thinking several steps ahead. And he completely gamed George Kliavkoff in the process by getting Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and now Utah into the Big 12 conference. It was going to be hard for them to land an Oregon or a Washington, and it makes sense that those two schools are ending up in the Big 10 now. But Brett Yormark has proven himself as an excellent leader of a lot of different types of organizations, by the way, because he was in charge of Rock Nation for a while before moving over to the Big 12. He is somebody who is likely headed for much bigger things before it's all said and done. As far as the Big Ten is concerned, I think they did a great job of going and finding value out west. UCLA doesn't have as much as USC, but you do attach those two schools at the hip. But they didn't feel the obligation to do that with Oregon State or Washington State and bringing Oregon and Washington over. So I think they got the best of what the Pac 12 had to offer, and leaving a lot of those other schools with a decision to make as well. They made those other four schools made the decision that they did to go to the Big 12. It'll be interesting to see where Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, and Cal end up. It's not going to be in one of these major conferences, but here we are now, BK, with the college football playoff expanding in 2024, and we have a better sense of what major college football is going to look like. It doesn't involve a fifth Power 5 conference anymore. There's going to be a Power 4, and it may get whittled down to a Power 2 before it's all said and done.
Yeah, welcome to the Mountain West, Oregon State. Good luck out there. You kind of feel for those four schools. And, in a sense, all of this is sad, right? One of the things that makes college sports so great is tradition and rivalry. And we're losing a lot of that stuff. Now, obviously, we'll gain some new traditions and rivalries with all of these teams moving conferences. And obviously, for Texas's sake, well, they get to reignite a couple of old standing rivalries with A&M and Arkansas. But yeah, I mean, just the tradition and the pageantry of these college football rivalries that we've seen for hundreds of years, it's all going away. And I get it. It's the almighty dollar. Like, I can't be too critical of these universities wanting to do what's best for their university. And that's going to these major conferences to make a crap ton of money on television deals. But you do kind of lose the some of the things that make college sports unique. And this thing, look, college football has really been a professional sport for a long, long time, but now it is feeling and acting way more like a professional sport. So I get it, but it's sad that we're losing some really, really good matchups that have been played for a long, long time in the history of college sports.
Yeah, you talk about how this isn't done just yet, and you're absolutely right about that, BK. The next shoe to drop is going to have to do with the ACC, and Florida State is beginning to lead that charge right now. Schools in that conference are really unhappy with how that TV deal looks right now and how long that TV deal goes too. I believe it goes into the middle of the next decade, into the middle of the 2030s before schools are able to leave that conference if they want to. So schools are looking at a bunch of different possibilities and how to get out of that deal or to help finance themselves getting out of that deal to land in a better conference. And Florida State is actually looking at private equity right now as a way, as a possible salvation to help them leave the ACC. Don't be surprised to see some of these other schools start to look along those lines too.
Yeah.
And before it's all said and done, we could see Florida State in the SEC. That might make sense, or the Big Ten. The Big Ten seems willing to go over that 16 number, obviously, with the schools that they just added. Would the Big 12 maybe make sense for a Florida State? I'm not totally sure right now, but I do know that schools that are in the ACC right now see the amount of money that the SEC and Big Ten are getting for their schools, and they realize that is doubling the number that the ACC is getting for their schools. They are going to quickly fall behind just from the basic numbers game of how much you are working with financially each and every year as you not only build that program up, but try and sustain it with the other legitimate competition that exists across college football.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this a little bit during your Night Talker episode on ESPN Austin back on Friday. You wonder when this thing is going to stop, right? Because I feel like for a while, a lot of college football fans just assumed we were headed to a 4 16 team super conference format, and that was just going to be the way of the future in college sports. But well, you already have the Big Ten surpassing 16 teams. So clearly they don't give a shit about what any of us think or what any of us want. They're doing what's best for them. And obviously, the schools, once again, are doing what's best for them, trying to make as much money as possible. And they realize getting as many big brands in the same conference as you can gives you the best opportunity to make a ton of money from those TV networks. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know where we're headed. We might be headed towards, speaking of professional sports, like an AFC, NFC type of format where it's literally just two huge conferences that, the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe they rename themselves to something else. My God, hopefully the Big Ten changes its name at some point because it hasn't made sense for years. And if we're talking about them getting more than 20, it's going to be even more ridiculous that they're still calling themselves that. But yeah, we might get to that point to where it's just like two huge conferences with, forget 120 plus, however many FBS teams there are. They might just take the top 40, 50, 60, and like that's how we're going to determine a national champion every year. Like just all of those teams play each other. We've got a playoff format similar to what we have in the NFL. And then the winner of each of those conferences / divisions, whatever you want to call them, they might be playing for the national championship. So that might be where this thing is headed. I think we almost have to get the idea of the 4 super conference bit out of our head because once again, it doesn't feel like the conferences are falling in line with that at all.
Yeah, for a while, going back 4 or 5 years, when I started to see the writing on the wall with regards to the direction that college football was headed in, I thought that 4 16-team conferences made sense, and there is a clear distinction between those 4 conferences and then that next level of college football. Which, by the way, you're giving that next level a chance to win a national championship when you put that clear line in place and you allow them to operate their own playoff too. But I think you're probably right about that. I think in the end, it probably does turn into a 2 super conference bit. And maybe the Big Ten and the SEC end up taking on, I mean, maybe the numbers still work out to where each conference is all of a sudden 32 teams, although I think the SEC would fight hard against something like that. But I would love to see a system eventually set up. This is going to piss some people off, BK, but that's fine. I'm trying to think about viable ways to make this happen going forward to ensure that the schools who are a part of the highest level remain competitive, where you have that highest level and you have that line where it's like below this level, you are operating within a different playoff system. But at that highest level, not only is there more money on the line in all likelihood, because these schools are working with more to begin with. But you also have something like relegation come into play, where if a school sucks so bad one year, they drop down to that lower level for at least a year, if not more. And a team
Wow.
that has proven themselves to be really good at that second highest level all of a sudden bumps themselves up. And I know that gets things into more of a professional feel, but we're not going to sit here and operate as if college football is an amateur sport at this point. There is entirely too much money on the line. And honestly, that's an ignorant way to look at things. That's the way that the NCAA continues to try and look at things, which is why they're fighting battles that have already been lost 5 years ago. You
You've
know?
got some people on your side with this relegation conversation, Trey. I don't know if anybody would sign up for that. I mean, hell, they can't even get the MLS to do it, and that's something that would probably make the MLS a little bit more popular
Yeah.
in this country. I don't know if colleges would sign up to potentially lose out on money, right? Because that's basically what you'd be doing if you got relegated to the lower conference or lower league. Then you'd basically be saying, yeah, we're not going to take as much money from these TV partners as we could if we stayed on board. But man, that'd be very interesting. And that would make those potentially random, meaningless late season games with two teams that are not bowl eligible, if bowls even still exist in the future of college football. Lord knows at this point. Hell, I'm not even sure. Lord knows at this point. Then that would obviously add some extra excitement to those the games between two teams who might be like 2-9 going in. So, man, that would be a very, very interesting twist.
And by the way,
It's
BK,
this is rare, by the way, though, that people are agreeing with you, because usually, yeah, you do piss people off with your take. So, congrats on maybe for the first time in our media career together that people are actually on your side here.
yeah, you put the terrible take Trey yoke on me many years ago, and that still reigns true from time to time. But I just want you to know this, BK. If relegation comes into play, your Kansas Jayhawks are on the clock, my friend.
What do you mean, dude? Kansas is so back. You have no idea. You have no idea. They made a bowl game last year. Lance Leipold has them rolling. Jalen Daniels might be the best quarterback in the Big 12, which, yeah, he's at Kansas. You got to go all the way back to the Todd Reesing days, Lake Travis's own, to where you felt like, all right, Kansas actually has a quarterback that gives them a chance to be competitive. And people actually think the Jayhawks are going to be good. So now that all that stuff's behind KU, man. They are back. We're trying to figure out when Texas is going to be back. Kansas, we know for sure, is back, and it's a beautiful thing.
God damn you, Joe Tessitore. By the way, Jalen Daniels was far and away the most sought after interview at Big 12 Media Days this year.
How about that? Well, he also was wearing a chain that had like a little screen that showed highlights of himself
It was
last
impressive.
season. Yeah, yeah, he's something else, man. He's something else, and he knows it too. We're rolling along into hour 2 of Texas Sports Unfiltered. Hey, we don't have to play a legal ID. That's pretty cool. Hey,
Yeah.
we don't have a 5-minute commercial break that we have to play after break for. That's also pretty cool as well.
This lack of traffic report brought to you by Top Gun.
Hey, we can mention Top Gun right now. We do need to give some love to our sponsors, and shout out to our friends at Top Gun Lawn and Equipment Rentals. Go see our friends if you need to tackle any job that you may have. They offer an extensive selection of rental equipment for everything from the small home projects to large construction jobs. They've got the biggest brands like Steel, Hustler, Toro, Walker, DeWalt, and more. Our guy, Brandon Mars. Trey, you know this dude very, very well. He is great people. Big Longhorn fan. He's the type of guy, Trey, that you want to have a beer or maybe even a full case of beer with. He's that good of a dude.
Yeah, maybe a couple of shots while you're at it. I actually still remember meeting Brandon in person for the very first time. We were standing in line to get beers and corn dogs at Texas OU. This would have been like 6 or 7 years ago. And I was talking to I think it was my wife. And he turned around. He's like, "You Trey?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm Brandon from Top Gun." And so we ended up shooting the shit and really hitting it off from there. I see him every year at the Mullet Open. And Top Gun, in terms of the equipment rentals, there's no better place to go in Central Texas to do something like that, BK.
Yeah, 2 Austin area locations, one in Anderson Square up north, the other on South First down south. Check them out online, topgun.net. They will shoot you straight. All right, thanks to all of you for watching and for all of the comments. Anything more on realignment, or do you want to get to a staple from the old midday with Trey and BK?
I guess the only other thing that I wonder about with realignment, BK, is does the Big Ten consider cutting from the bottom? Because they are at 18 now, and that's becoming a weird number, because at that point, how are you divvying up who plays whom annually versus a rotation of some of those other schools? So I wouldn't be surprised if the Big Ten and SEC are talking about things behind the scenes, and the SEC is like, look, Big Ten, like, I understand you want to add more valuable programs, and you've done that by getting USC, Oregon, and to a lesser degree, Washington and UCLA. But these numbers are starting to not make sense. Can you maybe cut from the bottom? And if that happens, the Big Ten probably ends up getting rid of Rutgers first,
Yeah.
maybe even Maryland second. But if that doesn't happen, then watch out, because the Big Ten is going to be coming for every other possible valuable school. And that probably starts with Florida State, Clemson, maybe North Carolina too from the ACC, if and when some of those other schools really start to make a concerted effort to get out of that conference.
Well, we're not talking about the potential of the Big Ten potentially poaching from the Big 12. Like, I know the Big 12 has done a tremendous, tremendous job keeping itself alive. You gave Brett Yormark a bunch of credit. Hell, here's something that I almost never do. I'll give Bob Bowlesby a little bit of credit. Now, his ineptitude is a huge part of why Texas and Oklahoma decided to bolt for the SEC, and he screwed up a ton during his time as Big 12 commissioner. I mean, overall, his tenure was not very good, but he was the first guy to at least realize that, okay, once the two biggest brands in the conference left, they had to do something. And he was a part of obviously landing Houston and BYU and UCF and Cincinnati. So he deserves some credit there. But yeah, Brett Yormark's obviously done a great job at getting four schools from the Pac 12. And it feels like, all right, the Big 12 is good. It's going to last. It's going to survive. Yeah, it's not as elite as the SEC or the Big 10, but all right, they're going to be okay. They've got enough teams. They've got enough big brands to get a good TV rights deal and last for a number of years. Well, what happens if the Big Ten, I don't know, reaches out to Kansas? Like, there was a lot of talk about that a couple of years ago once the Texas and Oklahoma news dropped. And the Big Ten didn't want Kansas at the time, mainly because their football program sucked, but maybe they've got things going there. Obviously, their basketball team makes a crap ton of money. Like, that's a very valuable thing to sell to TV rights partners. So it's not just Kansas, it's any school in the Big 12. Like, what happens if the Big Ten or the SEC ultimately decide that they want to poach from the Big 12 too? Like, that's, it feels like the Big 12 is stable right now, but I don't know if that's really the case with the way things are shaking out.
My guess, and obviously you have to take this with a large grain of salt, if Florida State really is looking at private equity to help them get out of the ACC. But my guess is that the media rights deal that is in place for the Big 12 starting in 2025, I believe, is going to make it very difficult for a school to leave that conference without paying a huge sum of cash. By the way, this is a footnote on Utah joining the conference, considering that BYU is here as of this year for the sake of the Holy War going forward. Utah is going to make more next year than BYU is as a member of the conference, because BYU is basically incrementally working their way up to what all the other schools are making. I think the four schools that joined this year are in that category, but Utah is going to make that lump sum that's just over $30 million once they enter the conference next season. So just more fodder for those two sides to fight over when it gets to it. But I feel like, I mean, you make an interesting point, and it is always possible, but because of how smart Brett Yormark has been in putting together these contracts, including, by the way, ensuring new schools getting the same cut as everybody else, which isn't even happening in the Big Ten. Oregon and Washington, I believe, are taking less initially to join that conference, although it's significantly more than what they would have made with that Apple Pac-12 TV deal. I think it's going to be hard for a Big 12 school to leave and not pay an arm and a leg in the process.
Yeah, you might be right. What a joke. The Pac-12 TV deal, or lack thereof. I mean, Larry Scott put that conference in a horrible spot, and then George Kliavkoff just basically said, hold my beer, and did him one worse.
Dude, it was hilarious to watch the progression of that, because it started as, oh, the Big 12 is getting $30 million per school. We're going to go way over that. We're going to be like 40 or 50 million. Then a couple months later, after USC and UCLA decide to leave, it's like, oh, look, we're still going to make like as much as the Big 12, if not a little bit more than that. Fast forward 6 months. I mean, look, it's going to be in the ballpark somewhere as that 30 million. Then it gets to not even them making an announcement at Pac-12 Media Day, which, by the way, was a Friday news dump. Pac-12 Media Day this year, probably smart by them considering the direction the conference was headed in.
Yeah.
Later, it's like, oh, we're actually going to make 10 million plus less than what the Big 12 is going to be making with that new TV rights deal. And at that point, Colorado had already decided to leave. The writing was on the wall for some of those other schools who are still left there. And here we are now with a year away from there being only 4 major conferences in college football.
It is crazy. It is crazy. Enjoy it while you have it. I mean, this year's already going to feel different with the 4 new schools in the Big 12, but yeah, next year is just going to be insane. And obviously, with the 12-team playoff right around the corner, college football, as we've grown to know and love it over the last few decades, is no muss. We're still going to love it. It's still going to be awesome. Hell, it might be more awesome when it's all said and done, but it's going to be very different from what we've grown accustomed to seeing.